And good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. Thanks for joining us today for this virtual meeting for Yosemite's Visitor Access Management Plan. My name is Cicely Muldoon, and I'm the Park Superintendent, and I just want to say a few words before I turn it over to the team who's going to give a brief presentation, and then we'll get into a round of dialogue, which is always the most fun part. So this is no surprise to anybody here. Crowding and congestion, of course, is a decades-long issue here at Yosemite that has really grown worse over the years. If you visited this summer, it's a glaring example of what it can be like. So this planning effort is intended to find some lasting solutions to this really decades-long problem, this long-standing issue that affects Yosemite and a number of parks around the system. We think this is super critical work to protect Yosemite's resources and provide for a high quality visitor experience. And that is what we all want to achieve for this really magnificent national park, both for all of us who enjoy Yosemite today and for generations to come. We think Yosemite's visitors and Yosemite's resources really deserve nothing less than that. So I can't really overemphasize how important we think this planning effort is to Yosemite's future. We want to tackle this issue in a way that really sets Yosemite and its visitors up for protecting the place for generations to come, for visitors today, for providing the kind of high quality visitor experience, world-class visitor experience, really, that a national park of this magnificence should offer to the public. To do that thoughtfully, we really need your help. So we really appreciate you taking your time today to join this meeting. You are part of shaping Yosemite's future. This is a really very important effort. In the first round of comment, we started this process back in December. We had about 7,000 comments. We fully expect to get that many going forward. So many people love this place, and certainly anyone who would take the time to be on a meeting like this today, we know you love this place. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to today's presenters, and I'll see you back again in a few minutes when we get through the slide deck so we can talk more. Two presenters today, Dr. Rachel Collins, who is our project manager working on National Visitor Use Management Team for the National Park Service. Rachel is engaged in this issue all across the National Park System. Also today, Kathleen Morse, who is Yosemite's Chief of Strategic Planning and Project Management. And I'm going to turn it over to Rachel and talk to you again in a few minutes.
Great, thanks, Cicely. A couple logistics I wanted to go over as we kind of get oriented to this virtual space. We are in Teams live events to host this meeting. A couple of things I wanted to point out for folks. We are going to be doing Q&A as a part of this meeting. Your Q&A button is up there in the right-hand side of your screen, or that's where it might be for most folks. That's the little icon that you're looking for, the little question mark with the chat bubble there. You can go ahead and type your questions into us at any time during the presentation. We have a team collecting questions in the background. They're going to be organizing them by theme, looking for common questions that we can respond to, and getting through as many of those as we can. We have a lot of people in this meeting and continue to watch the number climb. So we'll get to as many of those questions as we can. Feel free to drop them in at any point. Also wanted to let folks know that if you need to adjust sound, that's the little microphone icon down there for sound, and we do have captioning available in this meeting. There's the closed caption button there. You can go in there and select language preferences for captions. So just a little bit of orientation to the room. During this presentation, we're going to cover a couple of topics. We're going to talk briefly about the planning framework that we have. We're going to do an overview of the project context, the goals that this project is trying to achieve. And we are also going to be thinking about the overall process, doing an update on that. Kathleen's going to share those points with us. Then we're also going to talk about the strategies that we're thinking about now and how you can be involved at this phase of the process with us as we start into strategy identification. So it's a little bit of an overview of where we're going. And then after that, we'll jump into the Q&A. So with that, we'll jump into planning framework. For folks who have joined us for previous meetings, this will look really familiar to you. This is the framework that we're using for this project. And it's also the framework that is shared by all of the National Park Service units, as well as our sister agencies. We have been working on building foundations throughout the fall, defining our direction, setting goals, understanding issues throughout the winter and spring. And we are just this summer starting to transition into the phase of identifying management strategies, that green box where the blue arrow is on your screen. We are doing this as a part of this process, and just like I said, getting started on it, and want to invite you into that process with us to share your ideas for consideration. Before we get into the ideas, want to talk a little bit about why this project, what are we trying to achieve with it, and what have we already achieved in this project before we talk about the next steps. So with that, I will turn it over to Kathleen for project context and goals.
Yeah, okay, thanks, Rachel. Hey, everybody out there. Good attendance. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us. What I'm going to do now is basically give you a little roadmap about a recap on where we started with this project and what we've completed so far and where we're going next. So we're going to catch up a little bit and then we're going to move on to the next phase. So next slide.
Project before we talk about the next steps. So with that, I will.
Here we have the project goals. And just as a reminder, I wanted to start with the specific objectives for the plan. We're taking a real hard look at visitation patterns, focusing on the day user, the folks that are staying in our gateways or driving in from other areas of the state. You know, how many are visiting, when do they come, how long do they stay, and where do they go? We're also looking at the issues associated with current patterns of visitor use and how those really prevent our visitors from fully enjoying the park. How can we do a better job managing visitation so that we connect visitors to the park experience more effectively while maintaining the values that they've come to see? While there are many issues to explore, there's also many strategies that can be employed to address them. As Rachel likes to say, there are a lot of tools in that toolbox, and we are aiming to develop a strategy that works best for Yosemite and its unique setting. Actions that address one issue may prevent us from successfully dealing with another one. So we have to look at this comprehensively and get everything out on the table so we can deal with it as a systems problem instead of taking one thing at a time. You know, it's complex for sure, but through the years, we've collected a lot of information about how the park and visitors interact. And because of all of our prior planning efforts so far, we're off to a really good start. So just to recap on the issues that we started out identifying in the first rounds of this public engagement process, from the work that we've done over the years and the initial discussions that we've had with the public, we've identified several issues that need to be addressed and need to be thoroughly thought through as we're looking to the best strategies for managing visitor use. The key issues we've identified and shared with you in our first phase of planning were crowding on roads and parking lots from vehicle overload at peak times, impacts to the quality of the experience when folks can't find parking, are stuck in traffic jams, or fighting their way up overcrowded trails or overloaded viewing points, and challenges in protecting natural and cultural resources due to overuse, misdirected foot travel, and overloaded facilities. So this was a list that we developed as a Park Service, but we wanted to hear from our visitors, our stakeholders, our partners, our friends. What are you seeing and where are your concerns? So we asked you to help out with this during our first round of civic engagement. So to recap on our civic engagement goals, the purpose of the first phase of civic engagement, and this was last winter, early spring, was to provide background on the project's purpose, need, and goals, inform the public on the planning process and the next steps, and understand the public perception of issues and opportunities that exist. And this would inform the planning process throughout the entire period. So during this first phase of civic engagement, the comment period was held open from December 9th through February 3rd. Emails, newsletters, flyers, and postcards were distributed to share information about the project and the civic engagement process. The park met with the public both virtually and in person, held co-stewardship meetings with tribes, and met with interested parties and stakeholders throughout the public comment period. So what did we hear? How much involvement did we get? Well, this slide really tells the story. Like Cicely said, we received about 7,000 unique comments from a total of over 4,000 submittals. The comments were received from all 50 states and 8 countries outside the United States. If you're interested in seeing the full report on the comments we received, we have a complete over 100-page report, and that's available on our main project page. And I think the folks on the team are going to drop that into the chat link for you to be able to access that. It's really quite a remarkable response that we got for just the preliminary planning process so far. So where do we go from here? Okay, the project phases, there's actually 3 project phases. As I said, we just completed the first phase of public comment, where we were identifying issues and really kind of realizing and trying to get really down to the nuts and bolts of what it is we're trying to solve and why it's important. So now we're in phase 2 of civic engagement. Public comment is open through September 6th. Next year, we'll be entering a formal environmental analysis process with all the steps you're probably well familiar with during prior planning processes. And the goal would be to reach a formal decision on the park's approach to visitor use management strategies by the end of 2024. So now I'm going to turn things back to Rachel so she can go through what we're asking of you during this round of public engagement. Thank you again for joining us today and for your continued participation in this important effort. It is the first park-wide planning effort we have completed, or we are completing, since the 1980 General Management Plan. So back to Rachel.
Thanks, Kathleen. Let's talk strategies and get into what are we focusing on during this comment period. Before we dive into the specific strategies that we are asking you to think about, looking for feedback on, I wanted to stop and talk a little bit about management strategies generally in this process. One of the questions that we get asked a lot during this stage of the process is, are you considering this idea or are you considering that idea? And the answer is usually yes. We're considering all kinds of ideas that are being evaluated and explored, and we're inviting folks into that brainstorming process with us. As you help us with this brainstorming process, we wanted to share with folks some of the tools that we use to then move into evaluating those strategies for how they're going to help address issues and meet project goals. And those are on the screen right now. One of the things we like to think about is how desirable is that idea? Who is that strategy for? What are their interests? How are they going to engage with that strategy when we think about visitors? We think about users, when we think about all the different people who engage with Yosemite. We then also want to think about feasibility of a strategy. What is it going to take to get that strategy up and off the ground, off the paper and onto the ground into the park? What is it going to take to implement it? Are there costs associated with it? Are we going to need additional staffing? Are we going to need additional infrastructure? All things we want to be thinking about. And we also want to be thinking about sustainability. We want to be thinking about that from the perspective of, once we implement the strategy, how do we keep it going? How do we make sure that it can be supported for a long time? And so does that mean that we're going to do that strategy all of the time or just during some of the seasons? We also want to be thinking about the implications of what it means to implement that strategy. Is it going to have benefits? Who is it going to benefit? What resources is it going to benefit? Or is by implementing that over time going to have an impact on a resource that we need to be considering? And so those are all the things we're going to be thinking about as we start to take the list of ideas and start to evaluate with them. So how you can help us with that is, as we start to think about strategies and we start to think about ideas that we could be considering to meet the purpose of the project and help us achieve our goals, it's really helpful to start thinking about the who, the what, the where, the when, and the why of the strategy. We want to be thinking about things like, if we were to do additional bike paths, where would those go? Who would they serve? How long would they need to be? Or if we were to think about things like additional multimodal transportation or shuttle options, there's a big difference between a hiker shuttle and a day use shuttle and like an overnight shuttle that services the hotels. Those are all very different configurations. They're different strategies that could be used in different combinations of things. So we want to be thinking about that. The other thing I wanted to mention before we get into the specifics is we also want to be thinking about what combinations of ideas are going to help achieve our goals. So we want to be thinking about that there's no single strategy here, but there's going to be a combination of strategies that's going to ultimately provide us with a solution that really addresses the needs of the project. So without further ado, let's get into the current strategies that we're thinking about. First thing that we're looking at and we're thinking about is actively evaluating both the role and potential design of a reservation system. And I know that folks are pretty familiar with that here because we piloted a couple different permutations of that at Yosemite in past years. So we're looking at things like daily reservations, similar to something like the peak hours system in 22. We also could be thinking about things like lot level reservations for specific areas. That's a strategy that's been used both in National Park Service units as well as other destinations. We could be thinking about daily reservations for events or specific times of year, like Horsetail Falls. We also could be thinking about things like the timing of a reservation system. And so we've seen some examples at other units where we have like a morning version of reservations and an afternoon version of reservations to kind of spread use not only across the season, but across the day. Those are just some examples of things that we're starting to think about. I'm sure there are other ideas for us to be considering. So if you have feedback on any of these ideas, ways to add value to any of these ideas, additional permutations or additional ideas, we're really looking forward to seeing those comments and to hearing those from y'all. But we know that there's just not a one solution answer to this. This is a big park and a complicated issue. So there's a suite of strategies that we want to be looking at to pull together. And so one of the things we also want to be looking at is what kind of trip planning tools, ideas could support a larger strategy. And so we want to be thinking about things when it comes to visitor orientation information, things like traffic forecasts, parking space ability, best times to visit, current conditions information. How might folks use tools like that to help improve their orientation to the park? We also want to be thinking about trip planning information. How might people be able to leverage the park website, apps, social media, virtual ranger programs, other partnerships to learn and plan their trip? And also to look at technology, ways we can leverage emerging technologies to start thinking about, again, forecasting, availability of current condition information, and other ways that we can share that information. We've actually been piloting some of these strategies over this summer. So folks may be familiar with all the social media posts for sharing of information, as well as sharing the text alerts. I think we'll put some information about that into the chat, but a lot of ways that we are even now starting to experiment with some of these ideas. Another thing we've heard about in public comment and also are thinking about as a part of this process is that we want to be thinking about entrance stations. We think that there might be some opportunities to look at Archrock entrance as an area that maybe we could move it to an area that's wider, that could accommodate more vehicles. So we're thinking about that. Similar for Tioga Pass, is there a way to improve that entrance station, reconfigure it, or relocate it? And also thinking about, are there other ways we could streamline access that both welcomes people to the park and also reduces some of the queue lengths that we're seeing? Another category of things we're thinking about is not everyone comes to and moves throughout the park in a vehicle. We also have other ways to move around, like bicycle and pedestrian options. So we could be looking at bike and ped routes in front country areas. We also could be thinking about how to delineate different areas for bicycle use to reduce conflicts, and also thinking about how to improve traffic flows by mitigating any vehicle and pedestrian conflicts by looking at ways to improve those crossings. Again, if there's ideas that you have on any of these topics, we love to hear them in your comments that you're going to submit on to Pepsi or the park planning website. Another category of things that we heard a bunch about and we also are continuing to think about is transit and shuttle opportunities. So we're thinking about regional connectivity. We already have a YART system, so how might we optimize that to really provide meaningful access in a variety of forms? Thinking about park and ride options and what are the opportunities for rideshare. And again, this is another place to mention where it's super helpful for folks if we're thinking about transit and shuttle to really be thinking about the who, what, where, when, why, different versions. There's a lot of different ways that ideas like this could manifest or that we could make them implementable. So we'd love to hear from folks about the different types that we might want to consider. The other thing we are spending some time thinking about, would love some thoughts from y'all on, is where we have opportunities to take a new look at infrastructure improvements. There is a lot of work that went into evaluating, looking at alternatives for, and making decisions about how much and what type of infrastructure for places where we have recent plans. So things like Yosemite Valley, Tuolumne Meadows, the Mariposa Grove have really recent evaluations about the type and intensities of development in those areas. However, there are places like Crane Flat and Badger Pass, for example, that we haven't looked at in a while. And there might be underutilized opportunities there that we could be thinking about to increase the opportunity there and increase the experience there. And so if there's other places like that that folks have thoughts about, where we can think about how we use current parking, how we allocate those areas, what types of uses might be great there, And also thinking about, as our component of that, what kind of staffing facilities need to support a positive visitor experience. We want to make sure that when we're welcoming people to Yosemite National Park, we're also providing them with the staff and the facilities that are needed to make that a great experience. So those are some of our ideas. You have a role in this too. We want to hear your ideas. So some key questions that we're having people answer on our project homepage are, one, which of the strategies that are on our story map and were in this presentation, or a combination of strategies, do you think best achieve the purpose of the plan? And are there other strategies or changes to listed strategies that should be considered and analyzed that we haven't already talked about? We're really looking forward to seeing those ideas and integrating them into our process. You're going to see this link a couple times that's on the screen, and we're also going to post it into the chat. But it is best if we get comments on that project homepage. That's parkplanning.nps.gov/Yosemite Visitor Access. Tonight's Q&A box is focused for questions. If you have a comment, I would encourage you to pop that link open and go ahead and drop it right into the portal. When you get over to that website, it looks like this, and you're going to see an open for comment button. You're going to want to click on that, and that will take you to where you need to be open for comment. We are taking comments through September 6th and encourage you to participate in that. So it's because it's really going to critically inform our next steps. We'll be analyzing all the comments, taking all of those ideas, distilling them down, and helping to put a first draft of the plan together. Also want to encourage folks, if you want to stay updated on this process and get all the updates and reminders, to sign up for our Gov delivery. That is the email list that we send alerts when comment periods are opening, when they're getting close to closing. We're going to use this list also to let folks know when the recording is posted, as well as any links. And so if you haven't signed up for that, would encourage folks to do that. We'll drop the link into the chat there as well. So that gets us to the end of our presentation for today. I have heard from the team that there are a lot of questions coming in. So we are going to take just a 5-minute pause right here to get the questions organized, get sorted on responses to them. So if you needed like a quick break to refill your beverage or something like that, know that we are going to get sorted on the questions and come right back and do a Q&A. Also a good time for folks, if you wanted to sit and digest the presentation and just listen, this will be a great pause for you to be able to get your questions into that Q&A form, and we'll get them added to our list. So we'll be back in just a few. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for your patience as we organized all of your amazing questions so that we can answer them as efficiently and effectively as possible this evening. Thank you all so much for these fantastic questions. So we're going to go ahead and jump right in and get started. We had a question about the planning process and our first round of engagement. And as Cicely said earlier, we had so much great feedback on that first round of civic engagement this last winter. So the question is really around that first and now second round of public engagement. What progress has been made since the last time we reached out, and really help us understand a little bit more about what happened since we got feedback in January. And I'll pass that over to Kathleen.
Yeah, okay. So first and foremost, every time we interact with the public through our comment periods, we are always learning and constantly adapting our planning efforts based on what we hear. So the first comment period, we were asking, you all what the problems are. We thought we knew what the problems were, but we wanted to make absolutely sure we weren't missing something. So since that last comment period closed, our team has been looking at the problems that were identified through that first round of comment, and we've been developing a suite of strategies to address those. And that's what Rachel shared with you. For now, we want to know your feedback on those strategies. We all know what the problems are. We've got those nailed down. Now, what do you think about what we're proposing to deal with them? We've also better defined the desired condition for all areas of the park, and we started developing a list of things to measure and monitor to track progress in improving the situation. So all of this information will be bundled and shared back with you at a complete package when we move into the formal evaluation of the alternatives.
Great, thanks so much, Kathleen. Some of the feedback we got during that first round of civic engagement was related to equity and accessibility. So I want to pull up a couple of questions related to those two topics. The first one is, does the visitor use management plan take into account access to people of color and low-income families with any reservation systems? They pointed out that families, due to the lack of resources, are unable to plan months in advance for a reservation system. And Cicely, I think we'll start with you on that one.
Yeah, I'd be happy to answer that question. Thank you to whoever dropped that in the chat. Super important issue, and it's really important to us as we develop this plan to ensure whatever alternative we come up with really takes full account of equity and accessibility. Yosemite should be accessible to anyone who wants to visit, no matter what their backgrounds are, where they're from. So we will absolutely assess the impacts on equity with every single alternative that is developed in this plan. I appreciate you raising that. It's a super important topic.
Thanks so much, Cicely. And another question along the similar equity and accessibility topic, multilingual translations plus Braille and audio options for the public would be a great way to share and drop knowledge to the public. Is this on your radar?
For sure. Even more so now that you're mentioning it. Absolutely. We found in the last 3 years of a reservation system, having broad-reaching communications was really absolutely essential. And we learned really a lot between our first season and our second season in doing a better job at that. I have to have a shout out to our friends at Yosemite Conservancy who invested their time and talents in helping us, back to the equity message, to reach a really broad range of audiences and do some translations into other languages. So all of these things you're raising are super important to coming up with a plan that will have lasting impact and work well into the future. Thank you for asking that.
Thanks, Cicely. And this project obviously wants to make sure that we have access available to anyone who wants to use the park. So the next question that was asked was really related to let's see, more local use. How will Yosemite National Park ensure that local residents still have access to the park without reserving far in advance? Cicely, we'll just stay with you.
Stay with me. I don't know the how yet. The how is why we're in the middle of this planning process, but that is, of course, a very important consideration always. I want, in my perfect world, I would say anyone who wants to come to Yosemite is able to come to Yosemite almost on perhaps on any day. It will have to see how all alternatives shake out, but maximum access for people who want to visit is super important, from local people and people who live far away. And I understand the value of the spontaneous trip to the national park in your backyard. Super important. And can I just throw out a commercial for those of you who may not have heard yet, because I have a little bit of happy news to report. If you are a local, Tioga Road opens this coming Saturday. So hooray, High Country, if you're in the neighborhood.
Great news, Cicely. Thanks so much for sharing that and answering that question. And along those same lines, we know we've got a lot of locals and non-locals that have passes to access Yosemite National Park. Have we considered a separate lane for folks that already have a yearly pass of some kind?
Yeah, looking at the entrance stations and how they're configured right now is a super important part of this plan as well. For those of you who know our geography, some of them are really limited and cramped, like Arch Rock, like Tioga Road. So we want to look creatively both at new technologies that might help people move through the gates faster, and also if the gates are in the right place, and just how that all works so that we can be as efficient as possible about getting people into the park. We don't want to have those 2 and 3 and 4 hour waits that we have experienced this summer. That's not the kind of visitor experience we're looking for.
Great. Thanks so much. And we do have a couple of questions about reservation systems. We're going to come back to those in just a moment. We know that Yosemite National Park is not alone in this challenge of having many, many people that want to come experience these tremendous resources. So the next question is really around our framework, other national parks. Are there other parks that have solved or reduced pain points around visitor crowding, or is Yosemite National Park unique because it is a valley? We'll pass that over to Rachel.
Thanks, Maureen. So I think that every park is unique and has unique context for it. Yosemite is unique in that it's a very big place with a lot of different types of locations, some of which are very crowded, some of which are sometimes crowded, but each of them kind of have their own unique differences. So to answer the question, we have looked at area-specific places that are extremely crowded. So we could think about places like Cadillac Mountain in Acadia. So you don't need a reservation to get into all of Acadia, but it's also a very porous place. Very different contexts. We can also think about places like in Rocky Mountain, where Bear Lake corridor has its own reservation, which is a little bit different. I think one of the things I would encourage people to continue to think about as we think about area-specific reservations is how many places in Yosemite would need one of those? Would they be the same or would they be different? And if you couldn't get a reservation for that area-specific place, where else would people go in the park? Because we want to be thinking about the park as a system. And be thinking about the roadway network in a system. So those are just some of the considerations I think that we absolutely can be looking at site-specific types of actions. It's just thinking about the implications of that, and which sites would be most suitable for that.
Great, thanks so much, Rachel. And we did mention we are using the visitor use management framework, a national level planning process. Part of this process does consider the National Environmental Policy Act, and there is a question around recommendations in the National Environmental Policy Act for overcrowding. If you could address that too.
Yeah, I can. I love a good NEPA question. Thank you for letting me answer this one. So the NEPA is a process that we go through, and NEPA helps us evaluate the relative benefits and trade-offs and impacts from any proposed solution, or in NEPA terms, an alternative. So NEPA is a process that we engage in. It doesn't make recommendations necessarily for a decision, but more so has guidance for us about how we evaluate a decision. So there aren't any recommendations on overcrowding in NEPA itself. But as Maureen mentioned, we have the visitor use management framework that helps us think about how do we think about the difference between where we are and where we want to be on goals and the different types of solutions. And we're also looking to best practices and our friends and neighbors for things that have been successful there, and how we might apply that to Yosemite's context. So lots of best practices to learn from. They're just not in NEPA.
Great, thanks so much, Rachel. The next question, I know it's on everybody's mind, is around the reservation system. And there's some questions about helping us understand why the park chose to remove the reservation system this year. And is there a chance that there will be a reservation system later this summer? Cicely.
I got it. That's a great question. We made the decision not to enact the reservation system late last year. We've assured our surrounding communities and the public that we would have a long lead time for a decision like that. Our first 2 seasons of a reservation system were really kind of off the cuff, COVID-driven, responding to the public health emergency. We extended it out 1 more year because of the sort of massive amount of infrastructure improvements and construction that was going on around the park. But for 2023, what we had assured the public all along was we would not make this a permanent system. We wouldn't make any permanent decisions before we went through a rigorous public review process, and that is what we're in the middle of right now. It has made for, I won't deny it, it's made for a super difficult summer. We didn't anticipate the winter of 2023, but kind of if you look back over the history of Yosemite, even in the last 10 years, we're predictable in our unpredictability. There's always going to be some high drama going on. I can say the good news, well, we can't turn a key and turn the reservation system back on this year because that takes really months of planning and staffing. 2 of the 3 holiday weekends are behind us, and Glacier Point Road is open now, and the High Country opens this coming weekend. So I'm hoping that eases the pressure valve a little bit in the valley for the rest of the season. It's still going to be crowded, and if for those of you who are frequent Yosemite visitors know, you just either need to get here really early in the morning or come here in mid to late afternoon, and you'll be able to find parking and enjoy the park. It's that middle of the day that is it is pretty rough. And if you haven't yet signed up for the Yosemite traffic alert, I think that's been a great new adaptation this year. We have almost 20,000 people signed up for it, and that tells you when Curry parking lot is full and the valley is full and Mariposa Grove is full, and when those things open again. It's been a good new adaptation that I hope you're using, and I hope you're finding it useful. Next summer is a different story. We won't be done with this plan yet, but we will have we have an opportunity to test out some new things and maybe test out some iteration of a reservation system. It kind of depends on this public comment period that we're in right now. And we're doing a pretty intensive amount of monitoring, like Kathleen was talking about, of visitor use patterns and what's going on this year that we could factor into what we do in the future. I will say we're getting a lot of folks would like us to turn that reservation system back on either this year or next year or some form of it. But as we've been talking about so far, what we want to do to get to a long-term fix to this is make sure it's equitable, make sure it's communicated well, just make sure it can really work. So thank you for that question. And I am sorry it is a difficult summer, but I think we are on a path to finally tackle this thing once and for all that's been vexing Yosemite and other parks for many decades.
Thanks so much, Cicely. So our next question is also about crowding. Lots of folks in different areas of the park, but specifically about Hetch Hetchy. So folks are asking, how will the Hetch Hetchy area be treated in the studies? How will we evaluate impacts on visitor use that could come from increased access to that area? And relatedly, a second question is, to what degree are we thinking about improving access and opportunity in the Hetch Hetchy region? And are we taking into account what San Francisco promised in its 1912 Freeman Report and Congress expected when the Raker Act was discussed and the dam eventually permitted? So a couple good questions about Hetch Hetchy. I think we'll start with Kathleen.
Yeah, okay. So obviously, like I said, this is a park-wide planning effort. So we're going to be looking at all areas of the park, both in terms of increasing use and also maybe decreasing use in some places. So it's fair game to talk about what's going on in Hetch Hetchy because it's part of the park. And so what we're going to do, what we really need to be careful of, though, is when we start increasing uses or changing patterns that have been pretty well established over the long term, we can generate more problems that were unanticipated. So what we're going to have to do is think about this very carefully. And any of the impacts that would come from increasing visitation or changing visitation patterns will need to be addressed and analyzed in the formal environmental analysis process. So, everything is fair game to look at. There's improvements that can be made in the Hetch area. We know some of those already. So certainly it's on the table, but we'd have to proceed with a lot of caution in making those kinds of adjustments.
Thanks so much, Kathleen. All right, thinking about our gateway communities and folks staying in hotels, how do we make sure that local hotels have access for their guests? And Scott, we'll send this one to you, but relatedly, is there more information on how gateway communities fit in? So we've got two questions there for you.
Thank you, Maureen. Yeah, basically we're working real closely. We've got a lot of groups like, for example, the Yosemite Gateway Partners, which includes our partners from a lot of the local communities. And that's part of our challenge, as some of my colleagues have alluded to. You know, there's only a limited amount of people, as folks know, that can stay in the park, both in the campgrounds and lodging. And there's a lot of lodging out in the gateways. And so what we're trying to do is just come up with a strategy in a way that folks in the gateways can get people into the park and utilize their proximity. And like some of the examples have been mentioned already, like some of the hotels from the gateway have shuttle buses that if they can fit 10 people in, for example, that might be 3 or 4 cars. Or there's, the YARTS option, the public transportation that in a lot of the gateways pick up literally right in front of the hotels. So the gateway partners are our partners in this planning effort. And we know that as we've gone through this, we need to look at this collectively. So we're engaging daily with our gateway partners, and we understand that there are a lot of things that the gateway communities can offer our visitors. And in the meantime, they're great partners. They're helping us get the word out about the text alerts. We're talking to them about informing visitors, because as we all know, the visitors that can get as much information outside of the park before they come in are going to have a better visit. So we encourage all of the gateway partners to continue to contribute. We're working with them. We discussed the plan at our gateway partners meeting last week, and we're looking at this collectively. And I think that this meeting just emphasizes that we all have to look at this holistically, not just in the park, but in the entire region, to come up with strategies to protect the park and provide the access and make sure the gateway communities are successful, because they are critical to our success in this plan. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Scott. So as we think about the needs of our gateway communities and all of our visitors, one topic that comes up often is parking. And so there was a question about parking in the Valley. How many parking spots were available in 2019 versus 2023? Was there a loss of parking due to construction? And Kathleen, we'll start with you on that question.
I think you're muted, Kathleen.
Yeah, I can't, there we go. Sorry, guys, I'm having a hard time getting unmuted there. I don't know. Yeah, so let's see, where do you begin? The parking in the Valley, certainly under the Merced River plan, we solidified the number. We actually modified and rearranged parking to make it better accessible for the visitor and to get rid of some congestion problems. So essentially the parking number has stayed the same in that decision. It was actually improved by, like I said, the modifications. We've added parking, but the balance, we've taken away parking. So the balance is that the parking situation really hasn't changed. What you're seeing this summer in particular is a concentration of use. Our visitor numbers are actually lower than they were in 2019. They're actually lower in terms of the number of people coming to the park, in terms of vehicle loading. However, as Cicely had alluded to earlier, like Glacier Point Road was closed for construction for a while, and that pushed everybody into the Valley. And then we also had the High Country opening up so late this year that all those visitors coming through to the park really were concentrated in one location. So it made the problem seem worse than it would have been if the park would have been wide open during this time of year. So bottom line is parking numbers have stayed the same. The concentration of use has been what's causing us the problem.
Thanks so much, Kathleen. Along those lines, whenever there's a direct connection between parking and shuttles, so we want to pick up a couple of questions on shuttle systems. The first one is, has the shuttle system been considered as a solution? And Rachel, will come your way for that one.
Great. Yes. It's something we're actively thinking about. We currently have a shuttle system. We have a transit system for YARTS that comes from outside of the park and comes in. I think if there are other versions of shuttles or multimodal transit options that folks would like to see us evaluate, we'd love to hear what those are. And again, like I said previously, this would be a good place to think about who is the intended ridership for those, so which informs where they would pick up and the travel distances for them, and how long for them. We have a lot of examples of shuttle systems within just the agency itself. Some, really big differences between the yard system that goes, from pretty far out to things as small as Zion shuttle system, which only goes a couple of miles. And so the amount of time that you're committing to be on a bus is a little bit different too. And so those are all great ideas and great places to give us a little bit more information about what type of shuttle and who's the ridership for it and where does it start and where does it end and when does it run.
Thanks, Rachel. And relatedly, folks are curious about the supply and demand of the current shuttles in Yosemite. Why does this seem so lopsided?
Good question. I think that one of the things that we're thinking about is that we're not just solving a traffic problem. We're also thinking about the number of people that we're delivering to areas. And so in some cases, just adding more buses to have more people has downstream consequences for things like trails and other visitor services. And so we can be thinking about it from that lens. I think the other component of this is there's a real operational cost to running buses, if we're practical about that. And so in some cases, to be investing more in that solution means that there might be less funding for other solutions. And that's another trade-off and a balance point to be thinking about. And so this is one of the things is when we go and start to put these packages or selections of different strategies together, those are some of the things that we're going to be balancing. If we're going to do this over here, we might need to not do this other thing to do that other thing. We might have to think about a different configuration and a different balance point. So those are some of the kind of like levers that we're pulling and thinking about of how to balance potential future scenarios. And that's what we'll do in the next phase.
Great, thanks, Rachel. We had a couple of questions related to one related to wildlife and another related to speeding. And as we know, they are connected. So the first question is, will speed limits be lowered? Cicely.
I don't know if we're lowering speed limits as part of this plan, but it's something that we are constantly monitoring. I appreciate this question too. Protecting the wildlife is absolutely fundamental to what we do in other national parks, and speeding absolutely kills wildlife. You've probably seen, if you've been in Yosemite, those sandwich boards that pop up periodically that say red bear, dead bear. And that's an indicator of where a bear has been injured or killed by a speeding car. That's been a reasonably effective tool to help slow people down. I will tell you, it's a constant battle. We enforce it. We write citations about it. We try to do a whole lot of public education about it, and we'll incorporate it into this plan as well. It can be hard to get people to slow down here. It's one of those things that we will keep evaluating and adjusting and enforcing as vigorously as possible.
Thanks, Cicely. All right, we had another question. We talked about making sure that locals would have access to the park. There's another question related to preferences with any sort of day use registration or other permit system. Would it be possible to add a certain preference level for members of the local communities, i.e. residents of other counties that immediately surround Yosemite? And I think we're going to start with Rachel on this one.
Great, thanks. One of the things that we think about as a unit of the National Park Service system is that we're providing fair and equitable access to everybody within the nation, and be thinking about that. We know that people who live close to the park come frequently and have to transit through the park. And so we want to really be thinking through that lens of what does fair and equitable access look like when we're thinking through those lenses. I think one of the other things that would be helpful for us to get some insights on from y'all is how to define a local community. There's a lot of different ways that could be defined, and a lot of different interpretations of what that looks like. And so we would want to think about how would we define fair local access in a fair and equitable kind of way. So those are some of the lenses that we'll want to be thinking about that question through, and open to ideas and suggestions from folks, to go ahead and put that in your comments that you're going to put through. What does that look like and how would we apply it fairly? I don't know if Cicely, Scott, or Kathleen have other thoughts on that question.
Scott, you might want to speak to this sort of as an ancillary. This isn't totally about locals visiting the park, but there is an ability for people from certain area codes to pass through the park because some people have, doctors on the other side of the park. That's not really for recreational access, so it's a little bit of a different story than I think what this question is getting at.
Yeah, thank you, Cicely. No, and I'll just add, yeah, there's the recreational and non-recreational visits. And as Rachel started with, it's that balancing act. We understand that locals, visit the park and, people have moved to the area, not just here, but in parks across the country. So it is that balancing act because we do want to provide access, or we're mandated to provide equal access for everybody. But at the same time, we understand with the locals and as the gateways we talked about before, there's ways that we can work with them just based on proximity that we can find that balance. And so we certainly want to continue with that. And that's why our gateway partner colleagues are so important. And we're also engaging with like Visit California, for example, looking at tourism trends, working with other parks. And again, it's that balancing act, because as we're saying this, I think of communities like Estes Park outside of Rocky Mountain National Park, or Tusiana, the Grand Canyon, that are so close to these parks. And so it is a balancing act, and it's just trying to find that way of maintaining that equity and accessibility, but at the same time understanding that the locals, by their proximity, can not only provide another, not just benefit, but a way for people to get in. And it could also help with the overall system. And so, again, this is all part of this complex puzzle that we're trying to solve and incorporate all of these things into our eventual way of implementing this plan. Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much, Scott and Cicely, for those answers. As we're thinking about people entering the park, entrance stations, Kathleen, I got a question for you about the Arch Rock entrance and wondering if that could be reconfigured as far back as the actual entrance to the park near the Yosemite Lodge, where there is a wider space for more lanes.
Yeah, actually, that's right where we're thinking, but we're looking at a different location, actually. The difficulty with moving it back to the park entrance per se is that we have right-of-way issues with Caltrans. That's not really our road, so it's more difficult to put it on that side of the park boundary versus putting it a little further into the park. And if you all remember, there's a place where there's the old dam at Cascades. That's the area we're looking at to get at exactly the point that you're making. A much wider area to develop for multiple lanes of traffic. Remember when we did that at the south entrance, how much difference that made. Arch Rock is definitely a pinch point, and we are looking at moving that entrance station. It will take some time and funding, but it's definitely under consideration.
Great, thanks, Kathleen. And it looks like, Rachel, I know you answered a couple questions about shuttles a moment ago. We're going to come right back to that and wondering about who decides how many buses run and how often, and what can we do to increase the performance of the shuttle system in general?
That is, the shuttle buses run as a part of the contract, as part of the concession contract within the park. And so it's a part of that agreement. Scott or Kathleen might have more information about exactly how many shuttles, but I know it's a part of their contractual thing to operate that shuttle for the park, and that they're running it. I think that realistically, for where we are in the process now, it would be really helpful as we go into that evaluation of potential future systems to be forward thinking about it and thinking how many more do we need, and thinking about what is the issue there. Is it the leave behinds that people are experiencing? If you could tell us more about that and put that into comments, or thinking about, are they not coming frequently enough? And we would like to see shorter headways, which is the distance between the timing on shuttle buses. And also thinking about, do they need to go more places? Those are all kind of different issues that would get addressed with different solutions. So we'd love to know more in people's written comments about what they're kind of thinking as far as what does more shuttles mean, and how would we use them?
And I could just add to that quickly too. With the shuttle bus contract, as Rachel mentioned, that's part of our concession contract, and we actually have a shuttle bus contract for the Mariposa Grove and also in the Valley. And so for this season, summer, exactly as we talked about all the different challenges, one thing we haven't talked about is our traffic improvement project. There's an ongoing project to improve the traffic circulation in the Valley. We piloted the last few years, and we're constructing that systems to get people around better. And so right now, you know, there is some closures and there is a little bit of delays around the Valley. And so what's happening is that that's resulting in shuttle buses taking longer to get to places in some of the long lines that we're seeing. So right now with Yosemite Hospitality, our concessionaire, our partner, we're looking at, you know, bringing in more buses if we can, where it's practicable, you know, maybe changing the stops and working on this. And so again, it's a work in progress, and we understand that, you know, riding the shuttle is a great way to do it. And when we see lines, you know, we understand that. But again, with the construction, with everything right now, we're making as many adjustments as we can day to day. But again, as Rachel mentioned, this is a huge area that's ripe for comment. And we'd love to hear from all of you, because now, for example, you know, we've expanded the shuttle in the last few years to the West Valley, to Bridal Veil Fall, for example, or to Elk Cap Picnic Area. People really like that. So we have made adjustments. And again, it's a question of, you know, the buses that we have, moving them around, you know, drivers, you know, all of those issues. But again, we understand that there are long lines. We're working on both trying to adjust the best we can to maximize this summer, but also, you know, improve the shuttle bus system overall through this planning effort. And we've already gotten a lot of great feedback on it, and we just ask for more. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Rachel and Scott. Buses aren't the only way that folks get around the Valley. So we have a couple of questions about pedestrian and bicycle options. So the first one is, will new bike paths be separate from pedestrian paths? And relatedly, will new bike routes affect the current horse and hiking trails? Will e-bikes be allowed on the trails? And if parking reservations are required for Yosemite Falls parking lot, will horse trailer rigs need to park in the bus section? So lots of questions around bikes and people and horses, all the things. Rachel, let's start with you.
Thank you. My initial answer is maybe. That we're at the maybe stage of the planning process, which is really fun to get to brainstorm about it. And so I think, will new bike paths be separate from pedestrian paths? Maybe. We'd love to hear from folks about how would you use those? Where would you want to get to and from on a bike? Because they could be separate from pedestrian paths. It could be a bike lane on the roadway if we already have a roadway alignment in there, but it's maybe. It depends where people would want to get to and from on a bicycle and how that they would get used. So we would love to learn more from y'all about, if you wanted to get around certain places on a bike, where would you want to get to and from? And how would you want to go about doing that safely? But we are thinking about things like designated lanes on roadways. We are thinking about separate paths, maybe a combination of there. Would love to see all of those ideas. I know that Maureen and I and a lot of people on the call have all spent quality time on a bike in the Valley. So we're looking forward to ideas to expand that experience. And I think that, would new bike routes affect horses and hiking trails? We know that those are valuable experiences. So we're really looking at trying to optimize these experiences, not take anything necessarily away. I think the same thing when it comes to parking. We haven't made any decisions about specific parking lots. Everything's in a brainstorming phase currently. And so I think that we did talk a little bit in one of the slides about parking allocation. And if there's other ideas about places that are better suited for trailers, places that are better suited for designated overnight parking, if there's places that are good designations, and not just in the Valley. I want to remind folks we're thinking about park wide. So if we want to be thinking about different lots up on Tioga Road or down in Mariposa Grove that are really great for overnight versus short-term stays. All of those kinds of allocations decisions about how we best use our parking are ideas we want to hear.
Great, thanks so much, Rachel. And related to parking, we've got a shout out in the questions for the success of some of the social media and text updates. Since the 2 weeks after the 120 route into the valley reopened, there are no longer gate lines at the Big Oak Flat entrance, which is fantastic to see. Have we seen success in other parks with this type of real-time information system versus a months in advance entry restriction system? Rachel, we'll stay with you.
I'll happily take that one. I think some. I think one of the really interesting things about this type of tool or this type of strategy is when we think about the trajectory of a visit, and when people make decisions about a recreation visit, it's oftentimes not in real time. And so I can speak at least for myself. I have a 7-year-old. Once the 7-year-old has been told that he's going hiking and he's in the car with his backpack, we're going hiking. Once we're in the car. And so that's one of the reasons we've been thinking about and really wanting to emphasize trip planning information. How do we get people information at the time that they're making planning decisions, so that they can use that for getting and informing? I think it's also interesting. We had another study that was done where we asked people at the gate, if we told you right now the most popular parking lot was full, what would you do? And a third of the people said, I would still go and hope to get a spot. These are magical places. We want to welcome people to them. So I think that the travel information, at least from what we've seen so far, helps people know where to go, but doesn't necessarily change their desire to visit. And so we can think about it through that lens. But we're piloting this right now for Yosemite specifically. So would love to hear from folks, the text alerts, the social media. How are you using it? How is it informing your trip? What is useful about it? What's challenging about it? Those are all great things that would inform how that tool could continue to be leveraged into the future.
And I can just add to that real quick too. This goes back to the earlier question about the equity and reaching all audiences. And so one of the things that we've been doing, for example, is doing videos in Spanish and other languages, reaching out to other communities, trying to find ways. So as Rachel said, the text alerts are going well, we're getting the information out there, and we're just continuing to adjust and as we hear stuff, try to, adapt to it and get the word out there. But, this kind of stuff is so wonderful to help us for the, for the long-term solution.
Great, thank you both so much. We had, sorry, go ahead, Scott.
Oh, no, I think, I'm good, thank you,
All right, well, stay tuned because I've got another question coming your way. Has Yosemite National Park considered partnering with other national forests and parks to advertise all of the beautiful opportunities in the area that might help with dispersal? Possibly even shuttles to connect partners and events and that sort of thing.
So the short answer is yes. We've got a great partnership. I mentioned the Yosemite Gateway Partners, which has our friends from the Forest Service. We work closely with BLM, a lot of the other federal land management agencies, and there's, a lot of cause and effect. What's interesting is that with all the people coming here, for example, lines will go into like the Stanislaus National Forest or Sierra National Forest, and so it impacts everybody. So for years, we've been talking to people about there's incredible stuff. There's great opportunities outside of the park. So that's part of our long-term effort, because we simply don't want to say, hey, go to the forest or go to other places, because everybody has limitations. And so it's a way for us to kind of pool our resources, pull our information, and get the word out there that the Central Sierra, our region, has so much incredible stuff. And so, maybe, it doesn't have to be yes or no in Yosemite. It could be, Yosemite for part of it and the Stanislaus National Forest for part of it, or a BLM area or something like that. So we continue these planning calls, and also work a lot with the state of California. Visit California is working on a regional tourism plan right now that we're involved in, that's looking at these destinations and both sustainable tourism, how to, both help the local economies, but at the same time, not impacting the environment a lot or impacting the quality of life. So these are issues like here in California. We're blessed with places, not just with Yosemite, but, Napa Valley, Monterey, Big Sur, that have a lot of these. And so, as Rachel said at the beginning, all of the national parks are different so much, and all of these different, destinations are different, but we are certainly leveraging the collective wisdom out there and specifically working with our partners in the adjacent area. And they'll tell us things like, hey, this area is getting crowded, or this area. So it's a lot of fun, and it's just, pivoting. We're doing a lot of pivoting and just seeing what's out there. And as conditions change, we'll change the messaging, change where we send people. With Tioga Road opening on Saturday, as Cicely mentioned, that's a whole nother set of possibilities. So there's a lot of different things we're doing, both in the short term and in the long term, to bring the collective recreational opportunities into the public eye, and hopefully disperse visitation where everybody still has quality visits and the resources are still in good shape. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. That's great information about all the collaboration happening there in the Sierra. Fantastic. So our next question is not related to collaboration, but something that is equally near and dear to our hearts: bathrooms. Will portable toilets be stationed at various entrance stations? We know that folks have traveled a long way to get to the park, and we also have seen that there are some long lines that folks are in. So Kathleen.
Yeah. Okay. So, well, basically, one of the most important concerns that we have in people getting to the park is really providing for their basic needs. So that means we need restroom facilities, right? So part of this effort, we're going to be looking at where the bathroom needs are not being met and how we can better distribute that function. But we also have to make sure that we have people that will take care of them, and we have to have, balance the facilities with the staff available to maintain those. So those kind of considerations go through every type of decision like this that we make. I will say, though, that one of the goals of the plan, one of our hopes in doing this whole planning process, is that we won't have those kind of lines, right? If we do this right, we should be able to keep those lines moving, keep people coming in, and not have to put people in this position where they're waiting for hours and hours to get in. That's not a sustainable situation, and it's not something that we want to continue, having happen to our visitors.
Great. Thanks so much, Kathleen. If you could stay tuned for this next one. Years ago, there was a proposal to close the valley floor to most cars except for hotels and camping. Is this being considered again? We must limit access to preserve the experience. Kathleen, are you able to answer that one, or should we go somewhere else? The mute buttons are tough, y'all. Sorry.
Yeah, I got it.
Thanks so much.
It totally froze up. So okay, so let's go back. The idea of not having cars in Yosemite Valley was explored and was actually part of the decision in the 1980 GMP that I mentioned a while back. During the planning process for the Merced River Plan, which probably many of you were involved in, we looked at that decision and decided that it really wasn't something that was feasible to implement. It relied heavily on out-of-park shuttles system that was extremely expensive and is even more expensive today. So the decision was to continue to allow private vehicle access to the park and to balance the parking supply with the access that we anticipated seeing. So that's the decision. And actually the Merced River Plan formally amended through the NEPA process, formally amended the 1980 GMP to strike that language about removing private vehicles from the valley and to continue to provide that form of access. That being said, we recognize our problem is that we cannot have everybody coming in at once. We can, as long as it's distributed over time, we can handle a pretty good vehicle load. And with the revisions to the circulation system that Scott referenced, we can keep those cars moving, but they can't all be there at the same time. So that's part of the nut to crack through this planning process, figuring out how to pace activity.
Great. Thank you so much, Kathleen. All right, I've got a couple of questions about access to parking lots, although they involve different aspects of that. So the first one is around equestrian use. We want to continue to ride our horses in Yosemite, but the long wait with horses in trailers are unacceptable, and the Park Service has not designated parking for us. We would like to use and restore the old stables. How does the Park Service plan to accommodate private stock users? And then related parking question, not related to horses, but related to parking. What options are you thinking about for seniors to access features from parking lots who can't walk or stand for a long time for shuttles? So long wait times affecting both of these user groups. Rachel.
Maureen also saw a theme in those questions that I was seeing too. I think, again, if there are suggestions about where parking would be most useful, why it would be useful in those locations, that would be super helpful to hear. And so the answer again is like, yes, we're absolutely considering it because we're in the brainstorming phase and want to hear more details about those kinds of things and folks' comments. We already have hundreds of letters and we're already starting to read them, and anything that gets sent in, we're reading it. The other thing I wanted to mention related to these comments, and Maureen picked up a little bit in framing it, is that what I've been reading in the letters so far are some really unique, insightful, and meaningful components of why the crowding is impactful to you. That really helps us refine solutions in a meaningful way. And so I think that we've been talking a lot about solutions, but I think that I have been reading some really insightful stuff about why crowding matters to you, how it impacts your experience, that informs suggested strategies that help us to mitigate. And so these were two where I was like, it's really hard to wait in a long line if you have mobility issues. It's really hard to wait in a traffic line if you have animals in your car who you can't just unload very quickly. Those are all really great, insightful, and unique perspectives that y'all bring to the process. So that's why I asked for this question, because it was my chance to say, please continue to share those insights and values with us because they're so meaningful to our process, and I love reading them.
Great, thank you so much, Rachel. We're going to switch gears just a little bit off of parking. There was a really great question about how this might be related to some of the other great planning that has been done in the park. And Kathleen, I'm wondering if you could answer this one. What is the relationship of this plan to the 1980 General Management Plan? Will it tier off the General Management Plan or another document?
Yeah, like I said, the Merced River Plan and the Tuolumne River Plans amended the GMP. So our current blended plan is the basis for, pretty much kind of the umbrella. Tiering is a good word. It's the umbrella. It's the guidance that we give the planning team when we look at how to solve sub-area issues. Given that this is a park-wide plan, of course, we would tear off the GMP. In fact, we've already done a lot of that. We've looked at the desired conditions. I mentioned desired conditions a while back. We've looked at the desired conditions in the general management plan and made decisions about if they are still applicable or if they should be revised in some manner. So that's the type of tiering. It's a very broad plan, but we are definitely following the direction that's in it and marrying it up with this plan. If for some reason we would need to change that direction, this plan would then do just like the TRP and the Merced River Plan and the Tuolumne Plan, and it would make a formal amendment to the GMP. Right now, we don't think that's necessary. We're just using the guidance that's in it and trying to follow it and marry this planning effort with that guidance.
Great, thank you so much, Kathleen. All right, just gonna pull another one here. This one's related to the Yosemite Area Regional Transit System. How much money does the park currently provide to the regional YARTS access? And is it possible to increase the subsidy to have more buses at more times throughout the day? And I'm not sure if Cicely, you want to start with this one?
Kathleen knows this one inside out
Kathleen,
better than I
sounds
do,
great.
but I'll just keep Kathleen up a little bit. She'll talk about, we provide quite a subsidy to Yards, and we are proud to do it because we think it's a super important service. In all honesty, it's going to be hard to make that bigger than it is right now. But Kathleen, why don't I toss that to you? And we'll have a more nuanced response.
Yeah, sure. Right now, and for the last several years, actually, we've provided about $1.2 million to help Yards operate. And I think one of the things we'd want to think about if you're thinking about even expanding the number of buses is what happens is everyone wants to come in at the same time, everyone wants to leave at the same time. So staggering the buses through the day is a little more challenging because we have a lot more deadhead time. So it would take some careful thought. I think that they've monkeyed with the schedule and changed the schedule and adjusted the schedule over the years and have come up with something that makes sense operationally and as well as financially. But certainly it could be looked at again. But I think part of the problem is that deadheading piece where the buses come in and then they just sit there for most of the day. So you need to kind of balance that operational concern.
Great, thanks, Kathleen. All right. We've got a couple questions about parking areas here and transit systems, transit centers. So the first one is there a consideration to put a large parking and transit center in El Portal? Any considerations to worker shuttles from employees living in El Portal and having to drive themselves up to the valley at their own expense? And then relatedly, will the park be considering past proposals for parking areas in local counties that serve as transit shuttle access points? This could not only benefit the local communities, but reduce vehicle flow. And I know we saw another one about removing parking from the valley. So I'm going to send these over to Rachel.
Great, thank you. I would say, again, yes, we are in this kind of idea generation phase. And so if there are thoughts about specific locations where we think like a park and ride type of opportunity would be really useful or fruitful, we'd love to hear those specific locations. I think one of the things that we also want to be thinking about is the ride times that we have there. That would be a long time for folks to be on a bus. So we want to also be thinking about what does that look like? What could the schedule look like? When would people need it? Because if we're thinking about those long ride times, it's going to be similar to Yards as far as, thinking about who is the target ridership for that. But absolutely, if there are thoughts about where those park and ride opportunities would work and kind of who would be like the target ridership for that, would be really helpful and insightful for us to think about. I also know that there was a question about thinking about if we would want to move any parking out of the valley. And I would say we did really look at that within the Merced River plan. There were 6 different alternatives in that plan that looked at all different types of parking configurations on that. So we have looked at that and we have evaluated that and really thinking with like the river consideration that we do have the right mix of parking to provide the right opportunities to do river protection and also visitor experiences within the valley. But if there's other ideas to be considered about how we get people to the valley, how we get people to Tuolumne, how we get people to the groves, all of the groves, how we get people to Glacier Point, would love to hear those ideas and some of the details about what that looks like.
Great, thank you so much, Rachel. And I think we have time for maybe one more question. And I know that this has been on many people's minds, and that is really what is going to happen next summer? It's a big, broad question, but we'll see what Cicely has to say.
Okay, I'll talk about this one again. I think this is a really important question. We talked about it at the beginning too. We won't be done with this plan until December of 2024. That is our schedule, but that does not preclude us from piloting something next summer. We are all learning a lot this summer. We're being reminded of what life used to be like. I don't think we've exceeded our visitation numbers for 2019, even so far this summer, despite how crowded it seemed. But it has been squashed into the valley. That will get relieved a little bit in the coming week as the high country opens back up. But we're learning a lot about visitor behavior, about where people park, about where our resources are most vulnerable when, as Kathleen was talking about, everybody comes at one time. So I think we will be looking hard at the data we gather this summer and at the comments we gather from you all during this public comment period, and come back out to you as soon as we have a chance to digest all that and crunch those numbers a little bit sometime in the fall to talk about what happens in summer of 2024, because I think it's fair to say we have to do something. It can't go on like it's been this summer. It's too much of a terrible visitor experience, and it's too hard on the resources, and really it's too hard on the employees who are working an extraordinary amount of overtime just to hold it together. So we need a better way, and we can't build our way out of it. And we've all been talking about this collectively for many decades. I'm actually pretty excited that we're actually taking a stab at coming up with something that will work into the future for all of us who enjoy Yosemite and for those who come after us.
Great. Thank you so much, Cicely. And thank you, everyone who submitted questions in the chat. We apologize we couldn't get to all your questions. We do have a record of all the questions, and even the questions are really helpful to our planning team and understanding what is important to you, what you all value, and what we should be considering in this planning process. So with that, I'm going to pass it back to Rachel and Cicely to wrap us up for the evening.
Okay, thanks, Maureen. So did want to do a quick reminder for folks that we are in an active comment period. We are going to be open and taking your correspondences, letters, thoughts, ideas, and insights through September 6th. And this information is really important to us as we start to head into our next phases of refining these strategies, analyzing, trying to make them really tangible, and then moving forward into putting a draft plan together and starting to evaluate some different alternatives, which is where we'll be heading in kind of our next step. So there's the URL again on your screen as a reminder to comment, as well as we've been posting that into the chat. I think I saw an alert that that we were having some maintenance on the site maybe today. So if those links are not working, they will be working tomorrow. Another reminder for folks to sign up for the project mailing list, because we have been recording this session throughout the time. We're going to take some time to kind of clean up the captions and get it ready. We will be posting this for folks to review it. So if you have friends and neighbors who didn't have a chance to watch live with us, you folks are welcome to watch the recording. We will send an email out when that recording is posted and available, as well as post the link up on the project planning website. And that'll be another place where you can grab all of these links. So a thank you from me as the project manager on this process. Such insightful questions, such great attendance on this. A great way to spend a Wednesday evening from me, and I will turn it over to Cicely to close us out.
Just a quick thank you, especially to all of you brave souls who have hung on to the very end of this meeting. I know these are hard to sit through. A great attendance today. We really, really appreciate your commitment to Yosemite's future and your love for this place. And thank you for expressing your citizenship by participating and being a part of this park's future. It is really super important. Let me make one more pitch for the text alert system if you haven't signed up for it. You'll get tons of alerts every weekend if you're in the Yosemite neighborhood. They're really helpful for helping design when you come visit. But please do comment and let us know what you think. And we look forward to circling back with you in the next round. Thanks, everybody, for coming.